Hello everyone, I am Ishani.
And I'm Lavkesh.
Welcome to our channel,
A Canadian Dream.
We post videos on Canadian immigration, Canadian lifestyle and travel vlogs on our channel. So stay tuned and hit the subscribe button right now so that you don't miss any updates. So let's start filling up the form. This is form IMM 5532, Relationship Information and Sponsorship Evaluation. I have pre-filled the data in this form so that it is easier for you to understand, and I have used the sample data. It does not have any reference to any person. First is personal information about the sponsor. Your first name and the last name is to be filled, date of birth, and the client ID. Client ID is also called the UCI number. It is a number which is mentioned on any of the previous files that you must have filed with CIC in the past. Every person is assigned one UCI number which is unique. So in case you have this number, you can fill it out. As you can see, this is not a mandatory field, but it is okay to fill this. Then personal information about spouse or partner being sponsored, who is the principal applicant. In the same way, fill the first name, family name, which is the last name, date of birth, and client ID if it is available for you. And if it is not available, they can assign you a new client ID. Then part A is sponsorship evaluation and information about the sponsor. So this section is to be filled by the sponsor. First is the sponsor's employment history. So starting with your current employer, if applicable, give details of all the employers you have worked in over past 5 years. And in case you have not worked anytime between the 5 years, you have to fill in that information as well. I have filled in the sample data for you. Here you can see that now it is November 2020. So going back 5 years, it's November 2015. So even if you provide some extra details, like going back to 2010 or 12, 13, it is alright. So first you have to start with the latest employment information. Give the name and the complete address, telephone number for each employer, ABC company, address, and you can also mention the telephone number. And the dates from and to, occupation or the position or the designation that you are at, monthly gross salary or income, which is to be mentioned in Canadian dollars. Then I have given another example here. If you were unemployed, then you can mention your details like unemployed for 2 months before joining the new job. And in the same way, you can enter from and to dates and occupation since you're not employed. So you can simply write unemployed for 2 months and obviously no salary at that time. So in that way, you can fill in the last 5 years data. Other sponsorship. Have you sponsored in the past or are currently sponsoring any other member of your family in the different application? So if you're filling out this form for the spousal sponsorship and also you have some other sponsorship application going on, you can mention those details here. In case no other application is being filed, you can simply mark it as no and go to question 3. In case this question is not applicable to you, you can simply write not applicable here or NA here. So writing not applicable in the blank sections is not mandatory, but you can always write it. Other financially dependent people. So give details of any other person who is financially dependent on you. In case there is nobody, you can simply mark it as not applicable. In case somebody is dependent on you, you can fill in the first name, the last name, and the date of birth for that person. After that, the level of education. Since we are filling out the sponsor's information, so this level of education is for sponsor. What is the highest level of education you have completed? Elementary or primary school, you can mark it as yes. Number of years completed. If you are from India, then it is from standard 1st to standard 8th. So you can mark it as 8. And secondary or high school, you can check it and you can mention 4. It is between 9th standard and 12th standard. Next is college or university. Based on the degree that you have completed, you can fill out this information. In case you have a postgraduate credential, you can fill in that information as well. Next comes the address history. So list all the addresses where you have lived in the past 5 years. Please make sure you do not miss out any information in this case. because it is an important section. And if the list of the addresses that you have is very long, you can always attach an additional sheet. In fact, you can fill in all the information in that sheet itself, or you can even start filling out the information over here and you can attach additional sheet. Then is the residence in Canada. Do you live in Canada now? If you do, please mark it as yes. If you don't, so you have to fill in the information. When did you last arrive in Canada? When do you plan to return to Canada to resume residence? Where do you plan to live when you return to Canada? So all this information is to be filled out. Next comes the previous relationship. Have you ever been married or in a common law relationship with another person? If you haven't, you can mark it as no. If you have, you can mark it as yes and provide the information here. Date of birth of the spouse or the partner, family name, given name, the length of the relationship, and other details. Next is the consent to disclose. You can simply read it and mark it as yes. Next is the declaration of the sponsor. You have to sign it here physically. Since you cannot type it or you cannot e-sign it, you have to sign it with ink. And on the date that you are signing it, you can just mark the date here. Next, part B, it is the information about principal applicant and it is to be filled by the principal applicant. First question is, before this relationship, was your sponsor related to you in any way? If the answer is yes, you can provide the information in this section. If the answer is no, and if you are not related to your sponsor in any way, you can proceed to next question after checking this box. Do you have any relatives, including aunts, uncles, cousins, etc., living in Canada? If you do, you can provide the information in here. And if you don't, you can mark it as not applicable and proceed to the next question. Have you ever been married or in a common law relationship with another person? If you have, you can mark it as yes and provide that information. If not, you can mark it as no and mark it as NA or not applicable and move to the next section. Next, again, it is the consent to disclose. You can read this out and mark it as yes. Declaration of applicant. You have to sign this box in ink. The principal applicant has to sign it. And you can select the date on the day that you sign it. Next comes the part C, which is information about relationship, and it is to be filled out by the sponsor as well as the principal applicant. First question, when was the first time you met in person? So first is the date, and if you do not remember this date, there has to be an approximate date, because if somebody met like 10 years ago, they cannot remember the exact date, but it has to be a close date to mark this date as very close to what you remember. Next, you have to mention where you exactly met. I have given an example like met at Mumbai, India, or wherever you have met. You can provide your details. Next is describe the circumstances of your first meeting. I have given an example. A mutual friend introduced us at a party. Whatever was the circumstance of your first meeting, you can describe it here. Did anyone introduce you? If nobody did, you can mark it as no. If yes, you have to provide this information. You can see an example here. Our mutual friend, whatsoever is the name of the person, introduced us at a party or wherever you met based on your information. Did you have any contact before you met in person? If you did, you can mark it as yes and provide your details. If no, you can mark it as no and not applicable. Again, I'd like to stress that mentioning not applicable is not a mandatory thing, but it is always good, and I'm sharing all this information based on my personal experience only. This is not a legal advice in any way. The next question is, are you living together now? If yes, you have to provide the information over here. And if you're not living together, then you can mark it as no and provide the reasons for not living together, like if you are in different countries, and also the details about if and when you have lived together in past. If you are not living together, have you visited each other during your relationship? If you have, then mark it as yes and provide your information as to where you met between this and this date, who traveled to visit whom, and when you're visiting each other, were you staying together in the same location, and where exactly did you stay. For example, here I have mentioned that from this and this date, sponsored is traveling to meet the primary applicant, and they were living together, yes, and they were living at primary applicant's parents' house at so and so city and so country. Here I have given other example that from this to this state, primary applicant traveled to visit the sponsor, and they stayed together, yes, and they stayed at XYZ hotel at Delhi. And if you're not living together and you're not visiting each other during your relationship, you can mark it as no, and if no, you have to explain as to why you're not meeting. Next question is, what languages do you use when communicating with each other? I have given an example here as English and Hindi. You can mention these details as per you. How often do you communicate when you are not together, and how? So this is an example. We communicate on a daily basis through calls or text. Based on your information, you can provide these details. Do your close friends, family, children know about your relationship? If they do, mark it as yes. If they don't, then you have to explain as to why they don't know about your relationship. But if they do, you have to also provide the information over here. Family name, given name of the person who knows about you. Also, you have to write as to who this very person is related to. Then what is the relationship of this person to the sponsor or the primary applicant, and the date they met the sponsor or the primary applicant. Let me give you an example over here. ABC person with XYZ as the given name. They are related to a sponsor and they are a friend to the sponsor, and also the date they met the sponsor, because we are writing sponsor here, right? So they met sponsor in the year, I'd say February 1st, 2018. So you have to provide a list of people who know about you. I can even share the sample template for this question and other questions where I have mentioned the see attached sheet as the comment. Next question is, if you are married, answer A below. If not, go to question 9. A is, was your marriage arranged? If it is, mark it as yes. If not, you can mark it as no. But if it is yes, you have to provide this information here. Describe how the marriage was arranged, by whom, when, where. You can provide all those details. Next question is, were there formal ceremonies or events to recognize or celebrate your relationship? For example, engagement ceremony, traditional or customary marriage ceremony, commitment ceremony, partnership ceremony, reception, honeymoon, etc. So if the answer to this question is yes, you can mark it as yes. If not, then say no. I believe no will be in the case where people are in a common law relationship, and if the answer to your question is yes, you can go ahead and provide your details here. You can provide the date, the description of the ceremony or the event, for example, engagement ceremony or traditional marriage ceremony, and the location of the ceremony, which is as per your details, and the approximate number of guests who were there in the ceremony and who actually performed the ceremony. For example, in the traditional Indian marriages, the marriage is performed by the Hindu priest, so you can mention that here. If you only had an engagement and a marriage afterwards, you can mention it like that. If you had a ruka ceremony, sangeet and other details, you can also mention those details in here. Another part of this question is, did any of the following people go to any of the events above? So be careful when you're answering this. If principal applicant's parents were there in the events that you have mentioned over here in the table, then mark it as yes. Next is principal applicant's children, if applicable. If the principal applicant has children, they can mark it accordingly. If not, you can leave it blank. Then is principal applicant's other family members or relatives. You can mark it according to you, which is yes or no. If your relatives were there in your marriage or engagement ceremony, then you can mark it as yes. Then sponsor's parents, you can mark it as yes or no. Sponsor's children, if applicable. If as a sponsor you have any kids and they were there in your marriage or engagement ceremony, you can mark it as yes. Then sponsors other family members or relatives, if they were present, you can mark it as yes. And if any of the people listed above did not participate, explain why. If out of A to F, any of the answer is no, you have to explain as to why some of the people were not present. Are either of you pregnant? Yes or no. If you're not, you can mark it as no. If you are, you have to mention the due date. Is there more information you wish to share to support your relationship? This is a very, very important question and the answer. So you have to provide a proper answer to this question, and basically you have to provide a story of your relationship as to how you met and how the relationship progressed and how you got married. It's like a love story of your relationship, but in a little bit formal way. So I can also share the template of this answer, and you can take a reference from there. Next is the declaration of the sponsor and declaration of the applicant, who is the primary applicant. You can simply sign it and provide the date. Next is the interpreter declaration. This section is filled in by people who are actually using an interpreter, and if you're not using an interpreter, you can simply mark it as not applicable, or you can even leave it as blank. Based on my personal experience, I would like to tell you that mentioning not applicable is not mandatory, but it is good to have rather than leaving it blank. All the information that I have provided regarding filling up this form is based on my personal experience, and it is not a legal advice in any case.